In a perfect world, we would have the money supply expand at the exact same rate as productivity. So whenever there was a productive means for credit, that credit would be granted to the borrower, and we would have a perfect system for determining which people we should lend to and which we should not, based on how they're going to utilize that debt to create more goods and services.
In this important lesson about inflation, George Gammon clears up a lot of common misunderstandings about inflation and explains why it's essential in a healthy economy. However, George Gammon believes that the inflation we currently face, or as he calls it, the increase in the money supply, is way too high. He believes that a perfect inflation occurs when it increases evenly with GDP growth. In the case of the United States, that would be an increase in inflation of 2 to 3% per year, as opposed to the 7% it is claimed to be today. Small inflation is a good thing because it stimulates the economy by increasing spending. But when inflation outpaces GDP growth, everyone loses their purchasing power. Alternatively, George Gammon explains that while a gold or Bitcoin reserve holds value well, the lack of inflation means that they cannot ideally promote economic growth. Make sure you stay tuned until the end, because George Gammon reveals exactly why the inflation that Turkey is facing today is unique and devastating to their economy. Now let's hear what George Gammon has to say.
And, in this nirvana world that doesn't exist, we wouldn't extend credit for consumption or very little of it, right? And we'd be able to determine, and we'd be able to kind of the free market itself, all the billions and billions of players that make up the market system collectively would determine not only what the best interest rate is, but who the best candidates were for that extension of credit for that debt. Because when you're increasing the debt, extending credit, you're creating more currency units. See, it's not just let me say it this way. The expansion of the money supply in and of itself is not bad. Like, we could expand the money supply by $1 trillion a day in the United States. And that isn't necessarily bad. It is if we can't create that many goods and services. You see, if we are, quote unquote, printing money, and there is no constraint on the banking system or how many currency units we can create, that's not a problem, as long as we are creating those currency units for productivity and productivity gains. That's going to make everyone richer, not poorer. The problem is when you start increasing the money supply for things that don't add to productivity. That's what makes everyone poor, by over the long term, stealing the purchasing power of the currency itself. So what gold does, or what a Bitcoin standard may do, is to a certain degree constrain that. The downside there is you are going to have less economic growth. Now, the good side is you're going to reduce the severity of the business cycle. You're not going to eliminate it. Now, if you did full reserve banking or full reserve lending, then there's an argument that I think you could almost eliminate the business cycle. But again, that's the benefit. What is the cost? And the cost is that you're going to very severely hamper growth. So which is better? You can argue both sides. But what is perfect that we will never achieve, by the way, is to have the money supply increase at the same rate as productivity. Or said another way, that the money supply would only increase to increase the level of productivity within the overall economy. So anything that detracts from that kind of perfect level of efficiency that we will never create is going to be a drawback of the system. So the gold standard is going to create an environment where we are not running on all 8 cylinders as far as growth. That we aren't creating maximum output because there is a constraint on the supply of money. And therefore, there will be some projects that will not get funded or get funded at an interest rate that's too prohibitive, that would have created more goods and services and benefited society. You see, that's another, just in my opinion, a bad argument that even a lot of the Austrians have, is that, well, with a limited money, not just a limited money supply, but a set money supply, then interest rates would go so high that it would attract savings, and therefore that would provide the capital. And I would argue, right, but that could be at a 20% interest rate. And to sit there and say that there's no businesses that deserve to be in business unless they can afford a 20% cost of capital, I think is ridiculous. Just like saying that there's businesses that are going to be funded at a zero cost of capital that should not be in business. And that perfect equilibrium point or market interest rate would only be determined if we could create this nirvana type system where we had this perfect ability to determine and therefore extend credit to the borrowers that are going to use that for productive means. But unfortunately, that doesn't exist, and it never will. So again, my point here, to make sure we're all on the same page, is although I think the gold standard may be the best bad system we have, it still would limit growth, and that would be one of the drawbacks. And then if you did a full reserve type thing, that would limit growth even further, to a point where I think it's pretty obvious the benefits or the costs would outweigh the benefits. So the problem is when you have something that you have to pay for, that's denominated in a currency you can't print, you got big problems, big problems. And we see this playing out in Turkey. So Turkey's issue is, I don't know how much dollar denominated debt they had. I doubt they would have as large a percentage as Argentina has had in the past. Now, their current situation, I'm not too familiar with. But pretty much the principles are the same. Turkey's problem is energy. So they have to have dollars to buy the energy they need. They can't settle in Turkish lira. So usually they have dollar cash flow coming in from their exporting and whatnot. And that gives the system itself enough dollars to circulate and buy the energy they need. But if they don't have those dollars coming in, now they're screwed. And what do? Well, they literally have to create not just base money, but they have to create broad money to pay for those the energy to settle in dollars. And so what they have to do is print their own currency, broad money, get it out in circulation by buying dollars, right? So now all of a sudden, even if it started as bank reserves, those bank reserves are now not just a liability of the central bank, but they're now turned into, now they're backing up actual currency units that are liabilities of the commercial banking system. See, now we've gone from broad money to base, or excuse me, from base money to broad money. Big difference. And it has to be in circulation in broad money because they have to sell those Turkish lira in order to buy dollars to buy the oil. So then you're creating more demand for dollars and you're creating more supply of the Turkish lira, which makes the currency tank. And then, of course, the currency tanks relative to the price of the stuff that they need to continually import, which causes, or is really, I shouldn't say it causes it altogether, but it's a huge tailwind for consumer price inflation, right? Because think about it. If you're, same thing with Japan, although they don't have as much of an issue with dollars because they are such a massive exporter. But if you're importing oil for, let's just say the global price for oil is $100 a barrel. But if your currency devalues against the dollar by 50%, now all of a sudden that barrel of oil, you have to have more of your Turkish lira to buy that barrel of oil in dollars. And then that input cost goes through the system. So everyone that needs oil, or let's say fossil fuels or whatever it is, that input goes into their cost, and that Turkish lira price goes up, and therefore the price they charge the consumer has to go up as well. And then it's combined with, and this is the key component here, it's combined with additional M2 money supply. See, when the input costs go up and it's not combined with additional M2 money supply, you might not get sustained inflation. You could get big inflation spikes, but it might not be sustained. And that's kind of a philosophical question that I've struggled with for quite some time. And I don't know that there's a definitive answer there. But if you have input costs going up and you have M2 money supply going up, I mean, you're almost guaranteed to get consumer price inflation in that scenario. So this is kind of how I'd answer the question is I'm sure social programs and corruption, low productivity have a lot to do with it, but I think that they are actually money printing as defined by not just increasing base money, but increasing broad money.
If you enjoyed that video, click here to watch Chris Martenson discuss the mega doom loop that egregious government spending has put us in.